This is a prison with no walls. Inmates can run away right under the guards' noses, yet not a single person has ever made it out. Carl was planning one last bachelor party before his wedding. He had already picked the location, South America, far across the ocean. Carl took his buddies to South America for 7 days and 7 nights of partying. After they'd had their fill, they prepared to return to England. But what none of them ever imagined was that while everything had been fine on the way there, something would go wrong on the way back. While waiting for the flight at the airport, Carl accidentally discovered that his friend Ryan had secretly hidden contraband in his pocket, planning to bring it back to England. This terrified Carl, but Ryan stayed completely calm. Without saying a word, he walked straight toward the security personnel and casually strolled right past them. His boldness scared his companions to death. Strangely, Ryan's nonchalant attitude actually fooled the security officers. After a quick scan with the detector, they let him through. Everyone was a bit stunned. They didn't expect this guy actually had what it takes.
Hey.
Luckily, it was just a false alarm. A staff member picked up some money Ryan had dropped. Just as the group was breathing a sigh of relief, their friend Greg suddenly seemed possessed, clutching his stomach in agony.
I'm fine. I think I need a shit. I think I need a shit.
And then beginning to foam at the mouth. At the same time, the working dogs started barking wildly. Before they could react, the entire group was taken to an interrogation room. It turned out Greg had swallowed balloons filled with contraband, hoping to slip through unnoticed. But the balloons had ruptured in his stomach, which was why he was foaming at the mouth. But this wasn't even the worst part. Moments later, a group of police-like figures burst in and searched them all, and found the bag of contraband on Ryan. They were doomed. The group had no way to defend themselves. They were treated as criminals and transported to a remote island far from the mainland. At the entrance to the island stood several armed military police. Against the backdrop of the sea, the entire island looked ominously eerie. The moment they landed on the island, Carl noticed the soldiers were busy disposing of corpses. As soon as one body was tossed away, another was dropped down. It seemed the only way to leave this island was through death. Soon after, they were loaded onto a prison transport with the other inmates, and driven to the prison in the center of the island. This prison was extremely strange. There were no walls surrounding it at all. The experienced Laubai immediately sensed something was wrong upon getting off the truck. Weren't they afraid prisoners would escape? As if on cue, an inmate suddenly took off at full sprint toward the perimeter of the prison, right in plain view of the guards in the watchtower. But surprisingly, the guards did nothing. They just let the prisoner run. Carl and his companions were dumbfounded. Watching a living person disappear right before their eyes, they were genuinely terrified. This prison clearly wasn't as simple as it looked. But after the initial shock, they noticed the management style here was bizarre. The guards completely ignored them, leaving them to fend for themselves. Seeing as standing around wouldn't solve anything, Carl's father-in-law Laubai suggested they find the prison administrator first. Perhaps through him, they could contact the British consulate. After discussing, the group decided to split up. Laubai took his son Kai, the only one who spoke Spanish, to find the warden. Carl, Ryan, and Blondie went to find a doctor for the poisoned Greg. Hugo stayed behind. They walked into the cell blocks, but what greeted them wasn't the guards. It was two rather menacing-looking criminals. Inside, it was like a marketplace. The inmates were left to roam freely, and seemed to be living pretty well. After wandering around for a bit, Carl and the other two finally followed a sign to a room sealed shut with an iron door.
Are you a doctor?
This godforsaken place really was full of surprises. The doctor didn't look like a doctor at all. He looked more like a gangster. With the language barrier, neither side could understand each other. But to save his friend, Carl couldn't worry about that. He kept using body language to explain. And surprisingly, the doctor actually let them inside.
Get there!
What they saw was a living person, naked and submerged in ice water, apparently about to have an organ removed. Realizing he might be kept there too, Blondie grabbed a chair and smashed it over the doctor's head. Just then, the man in the ice water spoke. This bearded guy actually knew English. He said if they untied him now, he would help the three of them escape this nightmare. Since they couldn't communicate with anyone else here, they believed the bearded man's words. But just as they freed him from his predicament, he immediately turned his back on them.
Stay away! Hey! Stay away, eh?
The bearded man bolted out of the room without looking back, as if this place were a dragon's den. Meanwhile, Laubai and his son weren't having much luck either. After many twists and turns, they managed to see the warden, but only through a video call. Who would have thought he was a completely hands-off manager? Laubai claimed he was a British citizen, and should be handed over to British authorities, but the warden shattered their hopes with a single sentence. This was an experimental prison with a brand new ecological environment. They couldn't leave just because they wanted to. With that, the screen lost signal. The father and son were utterly devastated. They had nothing to do with criminals, yet had become experimental subjects. But what was even worse, on the way back they discovered Greg had been taken away by two men. They didn't dare intervene, fearing they might cause more trouble. They could only follow behind and observe quietly. Moments later, they tailed the two men into an estate. The guards here didn't look like prison guards. They were all armed, hulking men. The scene before them left everyone stunned. What kind of prison was this? How could the inside and outside be so vastly different? Driven by curiosity, they made their way to the deepest part of the estate. The owner was using a fruit knife to slice a tomato in half. This seemed to foreshadow what was about to happen to them. At this moment, they were just tomatoes on a cutting board, ready to be sliced at will. Sure enough, once everyone was seated, the lady of the house unilaterally announced they would be charged a $2 million ransom. Otherwise, she would chop them into pieces and mail them to their families in England. The group was dumbfounded. This wasn't a prison at all. It was a gangster hideout. None of them dared object, and could only leave the estate disheartened. But the moment they stepped out the door, a tattooed thug approached them, and led them alone to a separate room. Inside were hulking men armed with AK-47s. They looked more like terrorists. Once in the room, Carl's companions delivered some good news. Their lost friend Black Sister had finally been found. She had been taken away by the police at the station, and had now ended up in the prison as well. But the bad news was, that the terrorist boss was demanding something from them, a pair of human kidneys. Since they had injured the doctor and let the bearded man escape, they now had to compensate with an identical replacement. But before that compensation, the boss had to do one thing first: have the doctor identify who had injured him.
Sorry about the chair.
The group was paralyzed with fear. They never expected the boss was serious. What's more, he proceeded with the second step, having one of them remove Blondie's kidney. The group exchanged uncertain glances, all turning their eyes to Black Sister, since she was the only one with a medical background. But at the critical moment, Black Sister got nervous and accidentally dropped the kidney. What was originally a perfectly intact pair was now reduced to one. That meant another one had to be taken from the remaining group. As for whose, Lao Bai broke a tree branch into 5 pieces. Whoever drew the shortest would lose their kidney. After distributing the pieces, Lao Bai found his own branch was the shortest, meaning he would be the one to give up a kidney. But this result was rejected by the doctor and the boss. Lao Bai was too old. His organs had no value. They had to choose from the 4 young men instead, and among them, Hugo's was the shortest, so it had to be his turn next. Seeing this, Carl quickly comforted him, and said he would shoulder the $2 million debt on his behalf. Hearing this, Hugo reluctantly agreed. Among the 4, Kai held the longest branch, but watching his companion about to lose a kidney, he secretly broke his branch in half behind his back, tricking Hugo into thinking he was the one with the shortest. He then prepared to take Hugo's place in the tub. Seeing this, Lao Bai rushed to stop his son, only to have a gun pressed against his head by the boss. Fortunately, the boss had urgent business right then, and the crisis was narrowly avoided. That night, Ryan secretly voiced his doubt to Carl. Since only Greg was the actual criminal, why were they all being locked up here? This meant there had to be someone else like Greg among them. They just didn't know who that person was. The next day, the two angrily went to the estate. The female boss had made a deal with them. Greg had to be treated before the $2 million was paid, so Greg was now at the estate, with Black Sister specifically assigned to care for him. Before going in, Black Sister told them they must control their emotions, or they'd attract the guards. But the two couldn't restrain themselves, since their friend Blondie had died because of him. Yet their Greg was lying comfortably in bed. Upon hearing of Blondie's death, Greg remained remarkably composed. He told the 3 that he had a way out. His boss was an incredibly powerful and ruthless figure. With just a phone and the truth told to him, that man could definitely save them all. Seeing he didn't seem to be lying, Carl and the others believed him and left the room. But where could they find a working phone? They remembered the ring Kai had taken from Blondie's body the night before. The two secretly took it, and went to the place where corpses were processed. Carl and Ryan, holding Blondie's wedding ring, approached the manager, telling him they wanted their friend to have a proper burial. But then they changed tactics, saying they wanted to trade the ring for a phone to contact the outside world. The manager spoke a little English, and was drawn in by the ring. He handed over his beat-up phone. With the phone in hand, all they needed was to get it to Greg. The two were strategizing, but unfortunately ran into Lao Bai and Hugo at that moment. So Carl took on the task of delivering the phone, while Ryan stayed behind to handle the two. Ryan came up with a clever lie, telling them he'd traded the ring for a burial plot for Blondie. Just a couple of sentences erased their doubts. Little did they know that Carl had already conspired with Greg. The two met in a public restroom. Once Greg got the phone, he immediately called his boss. The boss did indeed have the power to save them, but there was one problem. Why exactly were they imprisoned? If the boss learned the truth, they'd be finished. Greg's mind raced, and he secretly told Carl that Carl must take the blame. As long as the boss could rescue him, he'd bring Carl out too. If Carl refused, he'd tell everyone Carl's secret. This was both a plea and a threat. After finally getting rid of the foolish Ryan, Carl was now being coerced by Greg. Naturally, he wasn't going to agree. He pretended to pick up the phone to confess his mistake to the boss. Right in front of the boss, Carl exposed Greg. Now he would make this disgusting man disappear once and for all, pushing all the blame onto him. Greg tried to resist, but being injured, he was quickly pushed by Carl into the cesspit. By the time Carl hung up the phone, Greg had stopped breathing. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Carl threw Greg into the cesspit, and hurriedly left the scene. He thought he'd done it flawlessly, but what he didn't realize was that a pair of eyes had been watching him from above. That person was none other than the bearded man they had rescued from the doctor. It turned out this guy had been hiding on the roof ever since his escape. No wonder no one had seen him since. Seeing his secret discovered, Carl immediately tried to argue that he had killed Greg by accident, but this obviously didn't fool the bearded man, who immediately called his bluff. However, the bearded man had a different purpose. He wanted Carl to help him escape, and he knew the way out. Back at the dormitory, Carl deliberately deceived his companions, saying there was a factory on the north side of the island. Working there meant no one would bother them, and they could earn money to buy supplies, killing two birds with one stone. The companions all agreed, not knowing Carl had his own scheme in mind. The next day, the four came to the factory. The other three worked diligently, while only Carl was focused on escaping. When Ryan asked if he had given the phone to Greg, Carl lied without blinking, saying Greg had run off with the phone, once again pushing all blame onto him. Ryan, despite being a big strong guy, wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, and actually believed Carl's words. There was an escape passage in the factory, leading straight out of the prison. This was the way out the bearded man had spoken of. The two were conspiring to escape, when they were spotted by Kai, who happened to be the team leader. Looking at this masked stranger, Kai didn't understand what they were doing. Seeing this, Carl once again used his lying skills, telling Kai the bearded man was the gatekeeper here, and shouldn't be working today. If a supervisor saw him on shift, he'd be in trouble. Amazingly, Kai actually fell for this. With his bleeding heart, he decisively let the bearded man into the escape passage, following the stairs down into the tunnel. He only needed to walk straight ahead to escape the prison, but terrifying roars and the rattling of chains came from an iron door beside him, as if some horrible monster was being kept inside. Out of fear of the unknown, the bearded man scrambled back up, and when he emerged, he was spotted by Kai again. Kai didn't know what these two were up to, but he was certain they were hiding something. He wanted to know what Carl was really plotting. The commotion soon attracted others. Seeing this, Carl began making up stories again, trying to win sympathy, but the contraband he had thrown away earlier had clogged the toilet, and was pushed back up by the water flow, right in front of his companions. Now his secret could no longer be hidden. Yet even with his back against the wall, Carl still tried to push the blame onto Greg. Lao Bai was livid. He never expected this kid had been hiding so much. The whole reason Carl had organized this trip was to use them as cover, and he dragged them all into this disaster. The more Lao Bai thought about it, the angrier he got. Only Ryan's intervention managed to calm him down. Lao Bai wanted to teach Carl another lesson, but slipped and hit his head on the toilet, falling silent. Kai rushed forward, only to find his father appear dead. Moments later, Lao Bai suddenly woke up. It seemed the impact hadn't been life-threatening, but it had wiped part of his memory. He no longer remembered how they had ended up in this prison, including Carl's smuggling. Besides Lao Bai, their other companion Hugo was also unaware. Because of his singing voice, he had been chosen by the female boss Selma to perform at the Easter dinner. At the dinner, besides Selma, there was another major figure, the terrorist leader Blanco. Listening to Selma, Hugo finally learned that these two ruthless characters were family, biological brother and sister. The reason they could run this prison was that they had powerful financial backers. But shockingly, Selma had brought Hugo there for another purpose, to help her get rid of her own brother Blanco, and seize control of the entire prison. Selma gave Hugo a landmine, and told him to find a chance to plant it under Blanco's cushion. It was a simple yet dangerous task. Hugo could only add a condition Selma found completely acceptable, that she help him escape the prison. On Easter night, the siblings held a ceremony with a great burning oil ritual outside. This was the perfect moment for Hugo to plant the mine. He decisively lifted the cushion and placed the mine underneath, then pulled the pin. But to his shock, the first one to return to the room wasn't Blanco. It was Blanco's henchman. Completely oblivious, the man plopped down on the cushion. Hugo tried to leave, but was grabbed by him. And then, just as obliviously, the man stood up. Just like that, Hugo lost his life along with him in the chaos. Watching his right-hand man blown to pieces, Blanco was devastated. With Hugo dead, he turned his fury on Carl and the others. The three were dumbfounded. They didn't know any of the boss's men. They only knew Hugo had been taken away by Selma. Their words inadvertently exposed Selma. Blanco immediately put it together. Hugo had been sent by his own sister. She wanted him dead. The conflict between them ignited instantly. A gunfight broke out in the cell block. Moments later, as the henchmen joined the battle, the entire prison descended into chaos amid the rapid gunfire. This was the perfect moment to escape the prison. Hiding in the shadows, the bearded man decided to add fuel to the fire. He took advantage of a guard coming down from the watchtower to relieve himself, knocked him out with a powerful blow, climbed the tower, and grabbed the guard's walkie-talkie. He then contacted the control room operator, pretending to be the guard. He told the operator that the Selma siblings were fighting in the minefield around the prison, and instructed him to shut off the minefield minefield switch, the operator immediately checked the surveillance, and indeed saw the chaos. He quickly switched off the power, but carelessly, he was electrocuted unconscious in the process. Soon after, the prisoners discovered the prison had lost power, and began pouring out of their cells, running toward the perimeter. The entire prison descended into even greater chaos. Many prisoners safely crossed the minefield. Carl's group was also drawn by the commotion outside, and followed the crowd. The amnesiac Laobai was even charging at the front. But just as all the prisoners were about to cross the minefield, the electrocuted operator suddenly came to. Seeing the prisoners escaping, he flipped the switch back on. Soon, explosions began erupting throughout the minefield. The prisoners froze in terror, afraid of stepping on a mine. But Laobai, with his disrupted mental state from amnesia, ignored the mines beneath his feet and kept walking forward. He was quickly torn to pieces by a mine. By now, of the original group of 8, only 4 remained, and Kai was still trapped in the minefield, his fate unknown. Just as he was sinking into despair, a phone rang nearby. It was the boss calling Carl. Back at the prison, Laobai had managed to snatch the phone from Carl. Now it had become his keepsake left to his son. Seeing this, Carl ignored Kai's safety, and demanded the phone back. Only the boss could save them now. Kai never expected Carl to be such a heartless person. In a fit of rage, he hurled the phone away. The phone arced through the air and landed right in the bearded man's hands. Through this twist of fate, Kai had unintentionally saved Carl's life again. After getting the phone, they abandoned Kai in the minefield. By now, Kai, after experiencing the death of his loved ones and his friend's betrayal, was completely devastated. Without hesitation, he took a step forward. Soon after, Carl and the bearded man successfully escaped the prison with his help, but unfortunately, they missed the people sent to pick them up. Devastated, the two collapsed on the beach, sobbing. Just then, Ryan noticed that at some point Carl had stood up, holding a large rock in his hand. It turned out Carl had long planned a backup. He had prepared a lifeboat in advance, just in case something went wrong, but the lifeboat could only hold one person, so he chose to sacrifice his friend. Before leaving, he also stole quite a bit of contraband, but what he didn't expect was that shortly after he got on the lifeboat, a figure suddenly emerged from the sea. It was Black's sister. She had been the first to run out during the prison blackout. After waiting a long time, she had finally found a boat. The two had once been the closest of friends, but their reunion now lacked any warmth, because Black's sister had just witnessed the entire process of Carl killing Ryan. After their eyes met, they both looked toward the gun in the corner. The director didn't reveal who survived, but one thing's for sure. In the face of self-interest and disaster, human nature cannot withstand the test. I'm Matt. See you next time.